Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar sponsored by A New Climate. Today, we'll be talking about how to identify, purchase, and communicate about high quality, nature based carbon removals with IFM. I'm Alex Navarro, Director of Nature at Trellis Group, and I'm excited to welcome you all to this conversation. So, before we dive into things, I wanted to share a little bit of a brief overview for today's topic. Right now, companies have a real opportunity to lead with credibility in the carbon markets. The bar for quality has already risen, and those that step up now can help shape the standard for what integrity looks like moving forward. What we'll be focused on today are improved forest management projects, and you'll hear us referring to those as IFM projects. When these are done well, not only do they remove carbon, but they support healthy forests and build resilience for local communities. You'll hear today how companies are choosing projects that ensure positive outcomes and how new methodologies help to uphold high environmental standards. Procurement has evolved too, and the process relies on transparency, strong data, and close collaboration with project developers. So you'll also hear how companies like Microsoft approach due diligence, what defines a high quality removal, and how purchases and claims are being communicated with credibility. So, for the structure of this conversation, we'll have some brief presentations from our expert speakers. We'll go into a little panel discussion and then audience Q&A. Feel free to drop questions in the Q&A box throughout this conversation, and you can also talk to each other in the chat. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce our wonderful speakers. So we have Kurt Kroffel from Forestry Director at ACR, Lizzie Aldrich, VP of Business Development at A New Climate, Remo Faletti, Carbon Technical Analyst at ICVCF, and Ross Burnett, Program Manager for Carbon Removal at Microsoft. Thank you all for being here. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Lizzie to start our discussion. Take it away, Lizzie.
Thanks, Alex. I'm going to give a couple of comments about who Anu is and then set the stage for the conversation today. So Anu has been developing carbon offset and removal projects since 2001. We're the oldest and largest developer in North America. And we work now with 20 different technology types, some of which you can see here on the slide. And our largest portfolio of projects comes from our forestry projects. We have 128 active forest projects currently, 30 foresters on our team, and we manage 6.5 million acres, which is the size of Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Delaware all combined. So a large forest mass, and we really focused on this because we believe that forests have the potential to make a large contribution towards our climate crisis, to be able to be one of the large scalable solutions. Going to, and if you could advance for me, for some reason I'm not, there we go, thank you. Within our portfolio, we also have had success in low carbon fuels. So starting in 2011, we did delve into low carbon fuels and work in RIN, LCFS markets, as well as compliance offset markets in both California and Alberta. So basically anything in North America related to environmental attributes, we are involved in. So let's talk for a minute about what IFM is specifically. What are the practices on the ground that comprise IFM? So the first two in this list are probably quite obvious. You're going to be able to store more carbon in the landscape if you reduce timber harvest levels, you defer harvest or extend rotations, making those cutting cycles longer. And those are two techniques that we do employ with IFM. But IFM is a whole lot more than that. In some cases, it's fuels treatment, so altering fire severity and reducing mega fires or catastrophic fires by reducing fuels in the forest in areas that need that reduction. and thereby reducing the potential for a catastrophic fire. Uneven age management. And so the definition of that is having more than 3 age classes in the forest. And that can promote forest resilience as well as habitat diversity for a variety of different species. And so that's a benefit to the forest. Designating reserves, areas that are set aside from being harvested, and high retention harvesting. So when there's a choice, choosing those trees that contain more carbon to stay on the landscape. In some cases, stand irrigation and fertilization, which can help promote growth. Enrichment planting, I visited a site in the Pacific Northwest that had been previously owned by industrial landowner, and the landowner we were working with to employ IFM practices was going in and putting deciduous trees in a Doug fir stand that had been primarily monoculture Doug fir. So promoting diversity in the forest as well as release of natural regeneration. So eliminating invasive species and choosing species that can be released to grow that are going to store more carbon on the landscape as well. So what is the role of forest in climate action? So globally, forests sequester 7.6 billion tons every single year, and that's about 1.5 times the emissions of the US. And this storage is at threat. In the US alone, we've lost a net loss of 8.6 million acres from 2000 to 2020. IFM has the potential to address the climate crisis, as I said, in a scalable way. And by the year 2030, it could comprise 30% of our solution. So that's why ANU has really focused in on this particular type of removal and offset. So I want to just kind of set the table for who's going to speak today. So ANU Climate is the project developer and marketer. We identify the opportunities for projects and we find the relevant protocol under a standards body that quantifies the carbon reduction or removal from that activity. We go through the carbon calculations, and if there is a need to install equipment to monitor or measure those things, we make sure that that's put in place, working with the project owner on that. We then, once the standards body has a process by which we hire a third-party auditor called a verifier to come out on site with us. And that verifier then checks and reviews our calculations. If they're in agreement with those, they submit it to the standards body, in this case ACR, who does another review. And if they're in agreement, they then issue those credits. And once those credits are issued, we can then sell them to the end buyer. In this case, Microsoft will be speaking from the standpoint of the corporate buyer. And over the past 2 years, Microsoft has been a strong supporter of IFM with nearly 1 million spot removals purchased in 24 from IFM. And this year in 25, signing a deal for 4.8 million tons of carbon removal from IFM. So today you'll hear from ACR, the standards body, and what they're doing with regards to forestry and integrity there. ICVCM, or the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market, which is an independent governance body lending a core carbon principle to particular offset types, and then the corporate buyer, Microsoft. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Kurt to speak from ACR.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Great to be here today. Thank you for tuning in. I'm the Director of Forestry at ACR, and ACR is a carbon crediting program founded in 1996 as the first private greenhouse gas registry in the world. We operate in both compliance and voluntary carbon markets, meaning that essentially we issue serialized carbon credits for projects that adhere to ACR-approved methodologies. And ACR, along with our sister organization, the Architecture for REDD+ Transactions, is operated as a wholly owned subsidiary of Windrock International, which is a nonprofit that does a lot of sustainability and international development work throughout the world. So we have 3 basic buckets of project types that we issue credits to. We have our nature-based solutions that I'm going to be focusing on here, but we also have industrial reductions of super pollutants category and carbon capture and storage category as well. Within our nature-based portfolio, we have improved forest management, afforestation, reforestation, active conservation, which is similar to the avoided conversion project type in the regulated market, and wetlands and grasslands methodologies as well. ACR prides itself on having a best-in-class team of 10 professionally trained foresters on our nature-based solutions side that review all of our projects prior to each issuance. We also draft methodologies and provide technical expertise to our clients. So forests have a really high potential for curbing global greenhouse gas emissions. They currently absorb the equivalent of about 30% of global emissions annually. When it comes to climate mitigation potential of forests, improved forest management is only second to afforestation and reforestation project type in terms of potential climate impact. And when it comes to North American improved forest management, ACR is the most widely utilized carbon crediting program by far, with nearly 300 improved forest management projects that we currently administer across both our compliance and voluntary markets, encompassing nearly 15 million acres of forest land in the US and Canada, so about the size of West Virginia. So IFM is highly scalable in North America, and ultimately, whether forests are carbon sinks or sources depends on how they're managed. So the improved forest management project activity is really critical in ensuring that enrolled forests are carbon sinks by doing a lot of the things that Lizzie mentioned, ultimately preserving and increasing carbon stocks over the long term. So I've been with ACR for almost a decade now, and over that time, the carbon market has evolved a lot. There's been a marked focus change with more interest in voluntary carbon programs, especially in recent years. ACR's IFM methodology has also evolved over the last decade, undergoing occasional version updates to strengthen both in terms of rigor and practicality, based on a lot of lessons learned and the new science as it evolves. Functionally, the methodology has roots in financial analysis and consideration of ownership and management constraints, which is really well aligned with how land managers make long-term decisions about their property, which is key, of course, for uptake and scale. And while ACR's latest methodology has introduced an updated approach that we call the project-specific dynamic baseline, the approach really builds on the existing framework that's already been proven on millions of acres of forest land in the US and Canada. So project-specific in our methodology means the baselines are set in consideration of specific conditions and constraints of the site or the sites that are enrolling. And it really creates a precise custom baseline tailored specifically to the project, which is really important for additionality. And dynamic means baselines that are continually reassessed and adjusted over time so that crediting is representative of potentially changing conditions as they occur. And again, this is done prior to each issuance. So ACR's latest version of our ACR IFM methodology received recent approval from the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market in August of 2025. Our afforestation reforestation methodology also received ICVCM approval earlier this summer in July. And we're undergoing assessment of our of additional nature-based methodologies and industrial methodologies as well, with additional approvals expected later this year. So with that, I think I'll.
Kurt, you're breaking up a little bit on my end, but I think he was about to pass it over to
Yeah,
our
I was
next
passing it
speaker.
over to
Okay,
Remo. Sorry about that.
perfect. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kurt. So I'm Remo Filetti, and a carbon technical analyst from the Integrity Council of the Voluntary Carbon Market. So The ICDCM is a multi-stakeholder-led independent governance body for the voluntary carbon market. It was created 3 years ago, but they came from a task force for the voluntary carbon market that identified the need for integrity for the market in order to scale. So we created a market benchmark for integrity that we call the core carbon principles. So there are 10 principles that are divided in governance, emission impact, and sustainable development. And we assess both programs and methodologies according to these 10 principles in order to identify if they meet our assessment framework related to integrity. So we work in 3 different key pillars. First one, assessment and assurance. So as I said, we do assess programs and methodologies in order to identify if they meet our requirements on integrity. But once a program and the methodologies they are approved, we also contest an assurance process to guarantee that the program and methodology still keeps meeting our requirements over time. We also have a strong pillar on continuous improvement. So we do have some programs with also multi-stakeholder participation from market. And it actually points out to what's next on integrity for the voluntary carbon market. So currently we have one from traditional credits now. We also will probably launch one from monitor, report, and verification. Probably still this year. And finally, we also work in outreach and engagement with other market participants to deliver and interconnected global framework for high integrity carbon markets. Currently, we have already approved 7 carbon credit programs on the voluntary carbon market, and comprising all the most relevant ones in terms of credit issued. This also includes ACR and ART. And when we go to the methodology, so we have already assessed most of the key categories for methodology category for the voluntary carbon market, including afforestation, revisitation. And more recently, we have a decision on improving forest management that we approved the newest version of ACR IFM methodology for US forest land. Just a small explanation of how it works, our process of approving a methodology or a program. So we work in this 2-tick assessment process. So first we assess the program to understand if it meets our requirements on integrity related to the governance, more specifically, but also related to registry, sustainable development goals, and also double counting and transparency. Then we go, once a program is approved, we go and start assessing their methodologies. We also have a very strong relationship with the program to understanding their priorities on methodology assessment. And then on the assessment of the methodology, we also go have some interaction with the programs to ask for more clarification in points that we would like to understand better on how they address the criteria we have for methodologies. It's also important to highlight that our assessment framework is publicly available on our website. So all the criteria you assess both in program level but also methodology level can be accessed in our website. And just to show our result from the market, so we have already assessed 45% of the market, from which 41% it was not approved into considering our standards. And it's mostly because of the renewable energy methodologies that we have a decision last year. We approved already 4% of the market, but we are still assessing 21% of the market. It's also worth mentioning that 29% of the market is out of our scope of assessment because the program decided to not continue using these methodologies, and are mostly related to old versions of methodologies and also old CDM methodologies that might be updated into the new Article 6.4 framework. And that would be my speech for now, and I will invite Ross to come to the floor.
Thanks, Remo.
Sorry.
Hey, everyone. It is a real privilege to be here with you today. My fellow panelists represent organizations at the forefront of raising the bar for quality in improved forest management. I'm Ross Burnett, a buyer on Microsoft's carbon removal team. Before I dig deeper into my role, I want to share why our team exists in the first place. In 2020, Microsoft set several bold sustainability goals to be carbon negative, water positive, and zero waste by 2030. We're making solid progress across all of those areas, and I encourage anyone interested to check out our 2025 sustainability report, which was released a few months ago. I want to highlight that fact that our focus on becoming carbon negative actually starts with reducing our own emissions first. We've made significant progress and commitments towards our 100% renewable energy goal, massive strides across reductions and efficiencies in every aspect of our data centers, and we've made impactful investments through our $1 billion Climate Innovation Fund into countless innovative climate technologies. One especially exciting milestone for me and hopefully for this group is the announcement of our first mass timber data center in Virginia last year. It reduces embodied carbon emissions significantly compared to traditional steel and concrete construction. I think this context is really important because at Microsoft we know we need to prioritize reducing our own emissions first across scopes 1, 2, and 3, and then purchase carbon removal for those truly hard to abate remainders. That brings me to the carbon removal team. The science is clear. Even if we stopped all our emissions today, removals are essential to keeping our climate within IPCC targets. When the team started looking at carbon removal in 2020, it realized the market was supply constrained, especially for engineered removals like direct air capture and bioenergy with carbon storage, where high quality supply simply wasn't available. The same was true for high quality nature-based removals at the scale we needed to procure. Our team has multiple goals when it comes to carbon removal. We want to achieve our own carbon negativity goals, but we also want to build the markets we buy from. And that takes a few different forms. Sending clear demand signal to the market for carbon removal through our long-term offtakes, share our learnings through our guide for high quality carbon removal, which we update annually, and buyer coalitions. We can't do this alone. One of the more recent and exciting ways we've done this is through advanced market commitments like Symbiosis, which is targeting 20 million metric tons of carbon removal by 2030 and includes other major tech companies as founding members. So that brings me back to my role. What do I get to focus on the day-to-day? I have a really exciting job. I get to work with suppliers at the forefront of quality and scale in nature-based removals, primarily afforestation and improved forest management. I lead suppliers through our diligence process where we work with third-party providers to go deep on our due diligence on a project-by-project basis. If a project meets our quality expectations, we work together to sign a multi-year offtake agreement, committing to purchase volumes as long as pre-agreed milestones and quality are maintained. I've led our work and thinking on IFM and helped lead our first two large IFM offtake deals earlier this year with EFM, which was in the Pacific Northwest Olympic Peninsula, 68,000 acres, and with ANU across several eastern states, representing over 400,000 acres of improved forest management. We think IFM is a promising pathway because it can achieve significant scale in the short term while also offering substantial ecological benefits. Keeping working lands as working lands is an amazing way to do carbon removal. Our program takes a portfolio approach and will continue to sign offtakes across the several pathways where we work, spanning both engineered and nature-based. There's never a dull moment in the voluntary carbon market. It's constantly evolving, constantly raising the bar, more science methodology updates, including DMRV and carbon accounting. We believe that dynamic baseline methodologies released by both ACR and Vera last year are promising positive steps forward for accounting for IFM. But we know we need to stay close as these first projects issuing under ACR 2.1 issue their first credits. The market depends on trust, transparency, and quality, and our team takes each of those extremely seriously. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. That's the last of my intro.
Thanks, Ross, and thank you everyone for giving us so much information in a very short amount of time. Appreciate that. I think we can go ahead and turn off the slides here to see faces because I'm going to start with some questions for our panelists. Uh, I notice there's some amazing chat going on, so keep that up, attendees. I love seeing you all connect in there. And also, if you have questions, please click the Q&A button at the bottom, and you can submit your question, and I will be facilitating asking those questions to the speakers for the rest of the time that we have here. But my first question, Ross, I'm going to kind of keep it going with you. I want to hear a little bit more about what Microsoft looks for in nature-based removals and how you vet projects during your due diligence and selection process.
For sure. So in terms of process, we have a rolling RFP portal on our website, which is really easy to find, Microsoft Carbon Removal. And we also list on that website, which I think is linked to at the end of these slides, is our high quality criteria guide for carbon removal, which lists, I think it's 9 different pathways and general guidelines across all pathways, and then pathway specific information for quality. And so our due diligence really digs into exactly that. So we try and be really transparent with what we're looking for and what we think is high quality. This is updated annually with Carbon Direct, and it takes lessons learned from doing our diligence and is a continually evolving document. The things that we really prioritize, there's 6 different categories. I'll spend a second talking about each of those. Additionality and baselines. We require clear evidence that the carbon finance is necessary for the project to happen, and the project activities go beyond what's required by law or common practice. Projects must use conservative, site-specific baselines and demonstrate that the removals are truly additional. A lot of work goes on to MRV. We expect robust MRV plans grounded in peer-reviewed science and best practices. Projects must use direct measurement and validated models regularly updated in their life cycle and ensure third-party verification. We are now requiring dynamic baseline. We understand that's mainly available in the US at the moment, but we hope that dynamic baselines become more available around the world in the coming years. We know it's still new, but we know that carbon market or timber markets and policy changes can impact that, and we want to make sure that credits being issued reflect that dynamic nature. Durability, we look for projects that are actively looking at reversal risk. We know, of course, fire and pests and other abiotic and biotic risks are real for forests, and we're talking about long-term agreements. ACR has a 20-year crediting period followed by a 20-year monitoring period, which is a long time, especially in the face of a changing climate. So we want to understand those risks, how they're being mitigated. Leakage is definitely a significant concern for forestry, or for IFM especially. If you reduce harvest, is that not going to just go next door? So we're really interested in understanding more about how leakage can be monitored and mitigated. In theory, I'm excited about the potential to increase more wood over time, but certainly leakage risks are very real in the short term. And then social and environmental safeguards. We want to make sure we're actively addressing any potential harms, and then also trying to prioritize benefits. So improved forest management has massive potential for ecological benefits. Are developers thinking about ecosystem-wide benefits that these changes can have? Our vetting process typically involves deep technical review of project documentation and financial models, really try and be really transparent, have open books with developers so we can really dig in. Engagement with third-party diligence partners that can go even deeper than our team and staff has capacity for. We typically do a site visit, and then continuous monitoring and updates from projects to track them over time.
Thank you, Ross. So you said you had 6 categories. Let me make sure I got them all. and just repeat them back for
I'll
folks.
I'll repeat them because I
You're
might not have
gonna?
done them in order. So from the
Okay.
website, from the criteria document, social harms and benefits and environmental justice, environmental harms and benefits, additionality and baseline, measurement, monitoring, reporting, and verification, durability, and leakage. I think I might have combined two of those when I spoke.
Awesome. Got it. I think I had them most of the way there, maybe a little bit slightly reworded.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, that tees me up really nicely. I have a question for Lizzie because I'm kind of curious about how you as a developer work with folks like Ross at Microsoft. So from a developer perspective, how did you support Microsoft through their due diligence process that Ross just laid out for us? And I'm particularly interested in how you demonstrate additionality and permanence to corporate buyers.
Sure. Great question, Alex. So for corporate buyers like Microsoft that go into great depth, we typically set up data rooms where we can, under NDA, share the relevant documents, whether it's forest management plans, harvest history records, land tenure and ownership, proof and title, stakeholder lists, boundary files, forest certification documents under FSC or SFI, a whole host of other information, financial information. It's really, like Ross said, an open book, and we do have to be careful because we are sharing documents that are very critical to the success of the landowner's competitive advantage in a very competitive market, which is timber markets. And so we do have to be quite careful, but in being able to open the book through an NDA with Microsoft and their diligence partners, as well as go out on site with them to be able to have them conduct interviews on site with stakeholders and other relevant people, as well as see the forest and see the IFM practices in place. That really gives the buyer the assurance they need and gives them the information they need to be able to make an assessment on the project. And so it is a very thorough, long diligence process, sometimes a year plus. And we get to know each other. We get to know the diligence partners very well. And that's typically what we go through. Now, your question related to permanence and additionality, I think the IFM 2.1 methodology under ACR does a really good job on the additionality front of what we use is satellite imagery to show what neighboring properties are doing. How are they managing their land? And we do a comparative properties analysis so that when we're looking at neighboring properties, we're choosing only those neighboring properties that are of similar landowner type, similar forest cover, similar acreage, slope, elevation aspect. We go through a whole process in order to eliminate properties that would not be good comparisons. And then we get the top 8 properties and we look at what they're doing on the ground real time. And that's really, I think, the most additionality proof way to go about doing this, because it's not a theoretical question of what would have happened to the land, but it's literally an assessment of what is happening to the land in the same area. And in the absence of carbon revenues, that's what would have occurred on the land in question. And so with the benefit of carbon revenues, you're able to have an alternative management that sequesters more carbon than the baseline scenario. And that's an ongoing process. The reason it's called dynamic is because we're redoing this every single time we do an issuance. It is required by ACR every 5 years, but we at Anew do it every single time we issue credits. We're making sure we go through, and we tend to issue every year because buyers want the latest vintage. And so we're going through and we're looking at how are people managing their land? What has happened to timber markets? Are there sawmills that have opened up or closed down? Have there been changes to infrastructure in the area? And all of those pieces of information help us determine what would have been the most appropriate baseline. And so that's why it's dynamic, because it's redone every single time we issue credits, which tends to be every single year. So it's a tremendous amount of analysis. And it is also, there's some credit uncertainty for the landowner involved, because these things change year to year. And for that reason, these dynamic credits are more expensive than the static credits that preceded them. And the other question you said with permanence, corporates are looking for permanence. And as Ross said, that 40 years is actually a long time for landowners to commit to. It's a significant amount of time to think about tying up your land in a certain management. And so it is important that we have buyers like Microsoft sending a price signal that can allow those landowners to commit to such a long permanence period. And we know that the ACR is, like Kurt mentioned, backed by Winrock International, which is a well-capitalized organization with a long history. So we know that if a landowner were to try to exit the program early, they're going to face stiff penalties and be liable in court. This is stiff penalties. This is not something that is kind of like a carrot approach to keep landowners enrolled. They are legally bound to stay in the program for 40 years, and they will be taken to court if they do not. And so we feel good about the permanence of 40 years. And for clients like Microsoft, we've been able to work with our landowners to do things to ensure permanence beyond that 40 years through covenants and easements on the land. And so that is also a possibility given our relationship with our landowners. So I just want to put that out there, but that's what we've been able to do to ensure permanence.
Thank you. I was going to ask about easements and how they play a role. So thank you for bringing that up. One other thing that has come up in the Q&A here, just as a follow-up for you, Lizzie, and then I'll bring it over to Remo next. So beyond like permanence of the practice and the updated management, how do you mitigate for unexpected changes? Like, let's say there's a spongy moth outbreak in the eastern United States, which would wipe out canopies, or wildfire. How do you deal with those kind of unexpected natural disasters or outbreaks?
Yeah, so that is contemplated in the protocol by ACR, and there is a buffer pool that it contains a set aside of credits that are set aside for the entire lifetime of the project. And the amount of credits in that buffer pool is a site-specific calculation based on the individual risk factors in that particular project territory. If it's on the West Coast, fire is obviously going to play a greater role. If it's on the East Coast and the Northeast, maybe the emerald ash borer being a pest of concern is going to play a bigger role. So that risk rating tends to be a set aside of between 18 to 22% of the total issued credits are actually set aside in a pool to be released if there are any unintended reversals of carbon throughout the life of the project, be it through wind throw, pestilence, fire, or other disasters that are unforeseen.
Thank you. That's great. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Remo. We have a lot of questions in the Q&A about the your assessment that you mentioned. So my question for you is, what characteristics or qualities were you looking for in an acceptable IFM methodology during your assessment? And if you could just kind of speak, a little bit more to how you chose projects, or why they got they were approved or not based on the graph you showed would be really great.
No, that's fine. Thank you for the question. So regarding the IFM category in specific, so we did a multi-stakeholder working group last year with, as I said, like multi-stakeholder persons that participated and tried to identify which are the key points to assess on the IFM category. And the output from this multi-stakeholder working group that additionality is actually intertwined with baseline setting. So these are two parameters we look at, but we look at together, but also linkage. And once we identify these with the perspective of many market participants, we then went through the assessment of the methodologies that by that time was from the program that were CCP approved by that time. That also include ACR. And because we're a compact group, we do need to prioritize methodologies when we do the assessment. So for most of the time, we go and try to align with the programs, which methodologies they want to prioritize under each category. And also we do have a preference to start assessing the newest versions of the methodology, because we understand that it accounts for the most of the innovations from the category. That includes not just technological innovations, but also some lessons learned during the process of implementing projects on that category, or implementing projects using that methodology. So this is our, how can I say, initial filter to start assessing methodologies. But once we actually finish assessing the methodology and a decision is made by our governing board, we go back to programs and ask them if they want to proceed with the assessment of older versions. So for instance, we are currently assessing version 2.0 from IFM methodology from ACR on non-federal US forest lands. And also we go back to programs and ask them, okay, are there other methodologies from the same category that you understand that can be prioritized now? And of course, trying to understand our capacity as ICBCM Secretariat, but also the capacity from the expert from our expert panel. Because during our assessment, we do reach out to them for expert opinion on key parameters or key criteria for the specific category. And that actually also answered one of the other questions. So what we understand as scientific-based method. So we do have an expert panel that is renewed every 3 years, that we reach out to them to get insights from the category. Then we choose one expert to actually support us on the assessment of each methodology within that category. And of course, is an expert that has expertise on that category. And beyond that, when we go for a decision, we also have some instances that multiple stakeholders actually evaluates our assessment to provide a recommendation to the board, and also the board evaluate the recommendation to take a decision. So it is a process that uses multiple hands from experts, from multiple stakeholders that represent different perspectives from the market itself. And then that's the way we achieve a decision on methodology, or we achieve a decision for the category. So just going back a little bit, so on IFM, we assess a baseline, intertwined with additionality and leakage. So these are the key focus, but we also look at the other criteria we have in our assessment framework too.
Thank you. So you're looking at baseline, additionality, leakage as kind of the priorities. Could you just share a little bit, like in that pie chart you showed, I think there were 41% of the projects you assessed that were not approved. Is there like one big, like something that jumps out as a main reason for that, or it was kind of a mixed bag?
Yes, that was the decision on renewable energy category, and when that plot I presented, the chart actually represents the total credits issued. So indeed, renewable energy represents like at least 1/3 of total credits issued. So that was a reason, but it's also good to make clear that once a decision is made, it's not written on rock. So we do have, beyond the decision document, we also have a document called board observations, and that we point out for this case, point out why the methodologies fail, and invite programs to update their approaches and come back to us with new approaches to be evaluated later. And this is for all categories, for all cases.
Great, thank you. That makes a lot of sense that it was representing the renewable energy piece. All right, I have a question for Kurt. So Kurt, could you talk a little bit more about why ACR revised the methodology? And also if you could just talk a little bit more about the dynamic baseline. We have some questions around like if you allow the baseline to change, how do you how do you kind of track that and know what the real outcomes are on the ground?
Yeah, certainly. So ACR, our methodology has been updated. I think this is version 2.1 is actually the 7th iteration. It was first developed in 2010, and we update it to improve it based on lessons learned, because the methodology is widely used, and also to better align it with evolving expectations from buyers. And the carbon market has definitely grown, and it's became very clear, precise, and frequently updated baselines are important. So while it's still the fundamentally, like I mentioned, the same fundamental approach that's been widely used by hundreds of forest carbon projects throughout the U.S. and Canada, there really are, there's like 3 kind of key changes here. The first is the addition of the harvest intensity constraint, and that's really like a throttle on how aggressive a baseline can be, and it requires rigorous substantiation of the baseline, either through the geospatial analysis that Lizzie mentioned, called the comparable properties analysis, that leverages remote sensing to really look at what similar landowners are doing in the nearby vicinity, to make sure that the baseline is really in line with what's likely to happen in the absence of the project for that specific ownership. And we also have, you can also use a pre-existing management plan that substantiates the likely and actionable harvesting plan in the absence of the project, or even develop a removals only baseline, which still requires that a rigorous baseline is developed, and then conservatively defers emission reduction crediting altogether. But essentially, the harvest intensity focuses on conservatism and precision in the baseline. The dynamic piece, it operates as a practical checklist that reexamines potentially changing circumstances as they occur, to recalculate and re-verify the accuracy of the baseline at least every 5 years. We actually require it at each issuance, but issuance and verifications coincide with, at the most, 5-year intervals. And thirdly, we have some expanded reporting requirements for substantiating the baseline for buyers and external parties that is now required, and that just follows the desire for transparency in the carbon market that everyone's looking at. So I think it's a major step forward in providing landowners and buyers a scalable and practical and transparent approach. At the end of the day, this is not just an academic exercise for landowners and credit buyers. These are real commitments with investments being made. So it's important that we create rules to practically integrate improved forest management and carbon finance into landowner management decisions, and provide reliable quality so that buyers understand what they're getting into. And yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Kurt. And a follow-up, just someone asked in the Q&A for you. Are there plans? Basically, Ross shared about some of the due diligence done at Microsoft, and they were wondering if there will be any updates that might help relieve the amount of due diligence for a company, or, are you seeing other folks that take different approaches than Microsoft when it comes to due diligence and how they go about choosing projects?
Yeah, it's a good question. The market continues to evolve. We have, carbon crediting standards try to create the most robust and rigorous and rules that we can think of. It's obviously broad geographic scope. There's a lot of different landowners that are looking to develop projects. So there's obviously a lot of nuance. I think ICVCM in a lot of ways helps to further substantiate that credibility across at a methodology level. I think there's also rating agencies that look at specific projects, and there's certainly due diligence to be to be had, looking at any sort of investment, and carbon credits, I think, are no different. So I think there will be some degree of due diligence for all projects, but I guess I would encourage folks to leverage the variety of resources that are available about these projects.
Thanks, Kurt. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Ross. We have some questions around this topic, so I'm going to try to consolidate them. Ross, what specific information are you looking for from developers, landowners, and beneficiaries of carbon revenues?
Yeah, so definitely goes to the previous point I made about those 6 criteria. So, first and foremost, we want to ensure the integrity of the credit. A ton is a ton. Minimize impacts, maximize benefits. And then to do that, we really request a lot of detailed information from pretty much every step along the way. In terms of stakeholders, in terms of the many stakeholders involved, we request a stakeholder mapping, which makes sure that the developer, the project proponent, is thinking about all the different groups that may be impacted. And this really depends on project by project. Industrial landowners for IFM are going to have a different footprint than, for example, a collection of smallholder farmers in India doing agroforestry. So it's definitely not a one size fits all, but we seek to answer those 6 quality criteria that I mentioned earlier across all of them, and through deep documentation and digging in. So on those site visits, we try and talk to the various stakeholders and really understand impact. So obviously, in the case of IFM, reducing harvest has the potential to impact local mills and forestry related jobs. So we think there's definitely a balance to be had there, and we want to understand if new jobs are being created, different types of jobs, different impacts on those mills. The methodologies do a good job of laying out a lot of the work for the carbon accounting, but then we want to see, are there agreements with individual landowners? How are they interacting with other local stakeholders? And so, yeah, I think, financial models, like, we really dig into the details to paint the entire picture.
Great, thank you for that. We probably have time for like one more question before I have to wrap it up. I'll just say a few questions came up about regenerative agriculture or soil carbon, and I think I'm going to say that's not within scope necessarily for today's conversation. But Lizzie, when I turn it over to you to wrap it up in the end, let me know if you want to touch on those things at all. I think my last question would be, someone in the chat asked about this. I'm going to rephrase it a little bit, but it's becoming more common practice, or like more expected, to incorporate some co-benefits, like benefits to biodiversity and water benefits. Curious how or if those are integrated into these IFM projects, or how you're thinking about that in the future. And Lizzie, this question is for you.
Sure, thanks for that. Yes, and as I mentioned, in some of the IFM techniques like uneven age management, some of the natural benefits from that are improved wildlife habitat. Setting aside designating reserves can be really critical for animals that need corridors, etc. And then obviously keeping trees in the ground with the roots that are going to then hold soil allows water to get filtered before it moves into local waterways. And so that improves water quality. So IFM in general has a host of benefits, and we're looking now at ways to quantify those benefits. We're exploring in partnerships with other companies the use of eDNA, where you can actually get DNA from the water and look at what species are present on that particular landscape and track that over time. We're looking at bioacoustics to be able to also measure and track those animals that are present. And then, of course, water quality sampling, et cetera. We have a number of clients that would like to be able to track and quantify those co-benefits, and we have a lot of interest in doing that too. We know that there have been other efforts through, for example, Vera's ST Vista to quantify co-benefits and sell them separate from the carbon. At this point, most buyers of IFM want those co-benefits as a part of the credit that they're purchasing, because it is part of the charismatic nature of forestry credits, is that you are getting those co-benefits, and for that reason it's baked into the price. So currently we see those co-benefits as really being tied to the credit. And we do want to make sure that we can track and start to get more specific about quantifying those benefits over time. This is an evolving area. Just as 5 years ago, we didn't have the satellite imagery to do a comparative properties analysis that's now critical to the way we use ACR IFM 2.1. We're currently in a place where bioacoustics and eDNA is evolving such that in 5 years' time, that may be standard practice that we're able to do on our properties. And we certainly hope so. So we're in the process of exploring this through some partnerships that we formed, and we hope to have more in the future in that area. And with regards to soil carbon, that is something we have looked at very carefully, and do have some interesting headway, and feel free to reach out to me directly. My email will be in the slides if you want to talk about that more.
Great. Well, with that, I think we're going to wrap it up so I could share some resources with you all. Thank you so much to all of the speakers. I really appreciated that we dove into like the actual on the ground details and criteria. As a forest ecologist, I just got way more excited than I even imagined I would when we were talking about improved management. So super excited to have spoken to all of you and have a lot of thoughts to follow up on. Could you just go back to the resource slide real quick? Actually, I could do it. There we go. All right, so we have some resources for you all to, if you want to download. You can find these. I think these will be shared in the chat. They'll also be on our website. Yep, we just added those to the chat. We'll be following up with an email and recording. But that's all for today. So thanks again to our speakers. Thank you to all the attendees. If you want to rewatch this webinar, you'll receive it in an email. It'll also be on our website. Check out those resources. And that's all. Have a great week, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.